Welcome, everyone. Patrick and I are the founders of Noonautics, and we're happy to have you all here today. We're a nonprofit exploring breakthrough technologies. Our mission is to promote and push research like this forward. Our current focus is Daniel McQueen's DMTx project in Colorado. We are the fiscal sponsors and have just recently started accepting donations to fund the research to build a legal state-of-the-art research institute that utilizes this technology. We're very excited to sponsor this panel today with the participants from Imperial College London's groundbreaking new study on extended state DMT, discussing their experiences while focusing specifically on DMT entity encounters. Here to help us moderate the discussion, we have special guest Graham Hancock, renowned psychedelic researcher and author, and Dr. Andrew Gallimore, who developed the first model of extended state DMT with Dr. Rick Strassman. Thank you for your time and expertise today, gentlemen. We hope today will be one of many explorations into this fascinating research, and we look forward to more in the future. As a reminder, if you're watching this live, there will be a Q&A session after the discussion. Please comment and write in. Without further delay, let's get right into it. Thank you all again for joining us, and we're going to hand it over to Dr. Gallimore.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for setting this up. Can everybody hear me, first of all? Excellent. So just to kind of outline the structure of this event. So we'll start with, I think it's good that you get to know the people that are present today. Most importantly, of course, the panelists, who I'll get to shortly. But I guess, first of all, it would make most sense to begin with the man that, in a very real sense, started it all those years ago. Oh, how many years ago now? Well, it's getting on 30 years, maybe something like the man who did the large-scale DMT in humans, and that man is, of course, Dr. Rick Strassman. Would you like to say hello, Rick? Is he there?
For sure. Yes. Thank you, Andrew, and the rest of the panelists and the organizers. Let me say a few words about the whole idea. When I was performing the DMT work, one of the psychopharmacological questions that remained to be settled was whether it was possible to develop tolerance to DMT. It was impossible in lower animals. There was a cat study giving it every 2 hours for 21 days, and the cats continued responding normally after even 3 weeks of repeated DMT dosing. There was a human study at the NIMH giving it twice a day for 5 days or something intramuscularly, and there wasn't any tolerance. So in our study, we decided that it was important to see if tolerance could develop if it was very closely spaced administration. And so we chose a half-hour interval, gave a full dose every half hour 4 times in one morning. And there was no tolerance to the psychological effects. So in the DMT book, The Spirit Molecule, toward the end of the book, I suggest maybe a continuous infusion would be a means by which the state could be studied more carefully, and also might have some therapeutic relevance, because you could turn up and turn down the state of intoxication depending on the need of the patient or the client at that time. So then a few years later, Andrew and I put together the paper, which came out in Frontiers. Andrew approached me, and we divided the task. He came at it from the infusion protocol perspective, and I included or contributed the clinical relevance in the paper. And so things have taken off since then.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick, for the background there. Who else should I? I cannot miss out one of the world's leading DMtricians. Can use that word. there?
Sound has gone bad.
Maybe not. Is he in? Anyway, okay. So to the panel, he's what? Can you hear me? Oh.
I can hear you now. Lost most of what you just said.
Okay, I was going to introduce Dave Luke, but he's not there, so it doesn't matter. So yes, so I will introduce my co-moderator for this session, a man who needs no introduction, but anyway, the comparable, the inspiration, the insightful, and the occasionally controversial, Mr. Graham Hancock. Graham.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, it's a pleasure to join you all. I am fascinated by the entity encounter aspect of the of the DMT experience. Ever since an entity appeared to me during a series of ayahuasca sessions and gave me the plot for an entire novel. Since then, I've found it fascinating, and I'm really intrigued to hear what the volunteers have got to report.
Wonderful. Graham. Is my
A bit choppy, yeah.
let me sometimes
Frozen now.
yeah, it should be better now. Am I back?
You're back.
Is this better? I have two connections to choose
Let's
from.
hope so.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can.
Yeah, that's better. Okay, so as Rick said, we kind of we produced this model together back in 2016. The idea being to extend to stabilize the brain DMT levels over time using this target controlled intravenous infusion technology. And we developed this kind of a proof of principle model for this, really, but it was certainly never human ready, so to speak. And fortunately for us, the Imperial College, the peerless, really, and pioneering Imperial College team in London, particularly for the DMTx project, led by Chris Timmerman and Lisa Luan, a PhD student who actually headed this study. So whilst myself and Rick might have kind of lit a spark, if you like, and piqued interest in the potential of DMTx, certainly we can't take credit for the work that's been done by the Imperial team. So I think we should give their due credit. But perhaps even more importantly than that are the intrepid voyagers who volunteered for this kind of breakthrough technology in a way. And of course, they are the four of the 11, I believe it was in total, volunteers that we have here today. So I will begin with subject 0, the first person to receive DMTx. So Carl, just want to briefly introduce yourself.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I've been doing sort of cognitive science basically for 25 years. So really interested in how we use technology to learn, and that's led me to all sorts of different areas of research, including perceptual science and neuroscience, and looking at how we advance perception, and very much interested in the ways of technologies becoming available through substances like DMT. So yeah, lots of research in dissociative space as well, looking at ketamine analogs, etc. But I'm very interested in the entheogens as well.
Okay, thank you, Carl. And I don't know if actually subject 1 or 2, but Alexander Beiner, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Good to be here. So yeah, I'm Alexander Beiner. I don't know what subject number I was, but I'm a writer and also a kind of cultural commentator. So I'm one of the directors of Breaking Convention, which is Europe's largest conference on psychedelic science and culture. So yes, I suppose my interest has always been in terms of psychedelics, how we can gain information from those experiences and apply them directly to changing the world we live in. So the kind of original counterculture promise of the psychedelic 60s is something that I'm very drawn to, albeit maybe in a new and different way, a bit more of a complex way than we needed back then. So my interest with the trial was very much that question of, well, can we go into different realities, whatever they may be, and come back with useful information? And so, of course, the encounters with entities is perhaps, with this kind of DMT experience, one of the main avenues where we might receive information, as Graham mentioned, you know, whether that's a whole novel or a different social system or something deeply personal. So that was really my interest, and yeah, the trial certainly delivered on that in many different ways. So I'll hand over.
As we shall see. Yes. Thank you very much, Alexander. Jack, where are you, Jack?
Hi there. I hope you can hear me well.
Good.
I'm a pharmacologist and an engineer. I've been involved in psychedelic pharmacology since 2008, and I was giving animal labs, like all sorts of psychedelics, to see how that perturbed their sleep architecture, and then moved on from there to get a PhD in Melbourne neuroscience. And I've specialized in the study of consciousness, trying to cover as many verticals as possible, from sleep science, psychedelic pharmacology in animals, also in wild species, and then all the way to artificial intelligence, because I also work a fair bit in the engineering of that. So I have a small tech company that works in data analytics for consciousness research. I collaborate with many labs, including the Imperial College team, and to help with the data analytics for DMTx. But I've also always had a keen interest on experiencing all different types of altered states personally as well. So I've split tested dozens, if not close to 100 different psychoactive compounds and different altered state modalities. And so for me, the DMTx experiment has been a natural evolution of both my academic, industrial, and personal explorations. And I've always been interested in seeing, like, DMT, first and foremost, is so overwhelming in the visual phenomenological aspect. And I've tapped in and out a lot. I've also done a lot of different experimentations with different formulations of DMT, DMT salts as well. So this was not my first time with DMT fumarate. And so, yeah, with DMTx, it's very special to see how an extended state can equip the mind to become used to something as radical as DMT, which usually is so rapturing, and just for 5, 10, 15 minutes, you're completely taken away. And so this was and still is my interest in terms of DMTx. And it's definitely delivered, beyond expectations. I'm very excited to be with you all to discuss it.
Excellent. Thank you, Jack. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Anton Bilton.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, Anton Bilton. I'm the co-founder of the Turing Initiative, formed in 2015 to explore entheogenic entity encounters, and subsequently enthused by Rick and Andrew's novel ideas with extended infusion. We have worked with Robin Carter-Harris, Chris, and Lisa in funding the experiments at Imperial. My interest personally lies in communion with the sentient other, and I'm hopeful that from the experience we've had today, and as we progress, we will work into that field and seek guidance from these entities. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. Okay, so the way that this is going to work, we'll kind of get straight. I didn't miss anybody out, I don't think. Is I will ask, first of all, I will ask a few questions, more kind of general questions about the DMTx process and the DMTx experience, first of all. And then in the second half, Graham will take over and he will be probing more specifically entity experiences, which I think many of you are here to hear about. So panelists, avoid talking too much about entities in the first half. and sort of bring them up later if you could. Okay, so let's get straight to it then. So what I'd kind of like to do is try and ask these questions logically, thinking from kind of the beginning of the experience, or prior to the beginning of these infusion sessions, and work forward towards the end, kind of probing through, if you like, the experience from beginning to end. So I guess the first thing I should really ask you all is, when you went into this DMTx suite at Imperial College, this is obviously a completely new way of doing DMT. You're all experienced DMT users. Of course, that was a prerequisite to be part of the study, but this was completely new. So did any of you do or employ any kind of specific preparation or coping mechanisms or other techniques prior, even during the actual extended state experience? Maybe Ali, you can start with that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, coping is important, but also thriving and being able to navigate the space well. So I would add that in. So yeah, certainly. I mean, for me personally, I really went for it as soon as I signed up for the study. I stopped drinking, and I was working with a coach called Trish Blaine, who specializes in navigating non-ordinary experiences, and sort of did weekly sessions. So I used a lot of different techniques, and one of the mantras I had was Terence McKenna's line of an entity encounter he had, where the entity said, "Don't give way to amazement." Right? This, especially in the first few minutes of the experience, it's very overwhelming. So that was kind of a mantra I had, was that I'm gonna try and use different techniques like meditation, like breath work, like kind of intentional curiosity, as kind of attitudinal techniques, where I found very important, in order to firstly not give way to amazement, so that particularly in those first few minutes, which I'm curious to hear everyone else's experience, certainly for me, they were as intense as vaporizing DMT, and then it would level off. So there was coping for that, and then the leveling off, as things became easier to navigate, it was more of a question of almost concentration, focus, and discernment. So lots of different, so I meditate anyway, but a mix of mindfulness meditation and concentration meditation is what I was doing, and that I found very useful. And then also remembering to breathe as well. Yeah, that's very important. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Carl, do you have anything to add? Anything you did?
Yeah, very similar to Ali, but I also realized that it was kind of a process of sort of mutual exchange, and this idea of giving yourself over to them to be explored is kind of the price of admission. And by allowing them to explore me, I get to know them as such. So yeah, similar in terms of a dieta, no drugs, no caffeine, no alcohol, also no orgasms. At one point, I decided to not to retain my for a month, just to see how that would actually affect the trip, and it radically ramped up the intensity. So I think, yeah, the coping mechanism is very much treating it as DMT church for 3 months, and very much, I think having done a lot of novel dissociatives really helped cope with this experience.
Okay, thank you. A little bit too much detail perhaps there, but that's kind of that's interesting. Jack.
Right. I think in many ways I unintentionally try to be a control in a sense that at least half of my sessions I was jet lagged and sleep deprived and not particularly prepped in any shape or form, besides the fact that the decade and a half of experimentation definitely prepped me for something that was extremely intense. I can say that I definitely did a relatively good job at cleaning up my system in terms of daily substances. So I have not touched any caffeine in over 3 years now, and don't have any relationship with daily substance use of any type. So I could go into that space, not withdrawing from any substance or having my mind tempted into thinking how would it be like if I was still engaging with the sedatives of modern. So this is a lot that worked out for me. In many other ways, yeah, the body load that can be pretty strong during DMTx. So I have deployed a certain number of controlled breathing to alleviate that. And I think also my knowledge of pharmacology and biochemistry on a top-down level helped me reassure myself that this was not a toxic thing I was doing to myself, because after a few minutes, yeah, knowing that you're one of the very first people in the world ever to go through something like this brings some apprehension. And you're like, what am I doing to myself? Like at some point, even like the cannulas start feeling very weird, and there's a tingling, there's burning, there's pain, and the mind can really go in any direction. And having both a deep relationship with DMT prior and adequate knowledge of physiology can help control some of the more disrupting fear and panic responses. So yeah, I didn't do anything idiosyncratic to DMTx in terms of preparation, just trying to lead the cleanest and most resilient day-to-day on a psychonautical standpoint, which is what I do anyway. I've done for years.
Okay, thank you, Jack. So finally, Anton, do you have anything to add there? You did specifically. Anton there?
He's muted.
You're muted, Anton.
Yeah, I'd like to echo really what Ali and Carl said. Abstinence was very relevant to me. I brought to it the same reverence that I would use for my ayahuasca practices, which is 4 to 6 weeks of no sex, no drugs, no alcohol, lots of meditation, effectively bringing a focused reverence and notion of sacredness to something that I see as mystical and important. So what I've always found with that is the greater you focus on that, the clearer the visions, the clearer the connection is. So I brought that, and I found that although in the early stage there was a lot of disassociation with the first minute or two, once I'd settled, it was a good experience. But I'll come on to that when we talk about entities. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Anton. Okay, so I think all of you prepared your body and your mind. You set your intent. You try to remain calm, don't give way to astonishment, I think is what Terence McKenna used to say quite a lot. So let's get straight into it then. So maybe you can talk us through, compared to, I mean, everyone's kind of reasonably familiar, whether in first person or not, subjectively or not, with a normal kind of bolus or smoked DMT experience. Can you kind of talk us through a typical DMT experience from beginning to end? So, did this kind of initial roller coaster phase, did that end? Did it stabilize? Did the experience seem to evolve, or did it reach a kind of set point over time? So if you just like, as briefly but succinctly and detailed all of those, kind of talk us through. So maybe Carl, you can start, since you were subject zero on this.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think, I don't, if anything, there was more movement than usual. And that was kind of like, you had to stabilize yourself inside that movement. And it was like a kaleidoscope of interfaces that I was sort of being processed through, sort of scanned through those layers. Where I was kind of experiencing glimpses of alternate lives, And the sort of the most profound experience I had on the largest dose was being in a 5-MeO DMT experience. So there was definitely a difference for me from the usual DMT experience to actually having extended, sort of led to this experience where I was experiencing a disc at the bottom of the bed, and sort of realizing that this was not it was like a black hole, but it was like a unity space. I could recognize it as what I would normally experience in a 5-MeO DMT experience, and the phenomenology of that is that you're experiencing yourself as light with and a non-dual experience where there's no subject object. So I'm kind of experiencing this disc at the bottom of the bed and trying to understand how I can get into it. And then there was kind of a takeover of the space. It felt like there was an alien invasion inside the DMT experience where this disc cracked apart, and suddenly I'm like, oh my god, what's going to happen now? Thinking it might, there might be something negative, but actually what was revealed was a plurality of unities behind the disc, and for me that was a real a real difference from the usual DMT experience.
So it seemed like it progressed rather than kind of stopping as a bolus would, normal kind of DMT smoked or whatever. It felt like it was pushing and pushing further and further the longer that you remained under the infusion.
Yeah, exactly. It felt as if I was being shown much more of the knowledge of the secret knowledge that you would not normally experience in a standard DMT experience. And I was kind of bridging the dimensions inside this one experience.
So it makes you wonder then, if you extended it to an hour or 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, where you might end up. But that's for the future. So how about Ali? Would you like to kind of describe your typical DMTx experience?
So I would say that my biggest surprise actually from the experience was that it was it had a continuity to it through the experience, a sort of teachings and sort of interpersonal lessons, as well as metaphysical experiences that reminded me a lot, honestly, of ayahuasca, but different as well. And maybe a little bit controversially, in some traditions in the Amazon, the teacher is seen as the Banisteriopsis capi, the vine, and the DMT is kind of an admixture. Having done ayahuasca maybe 50, 60 times, and also having sat with just Banisteriopsis capi, my experience was very much that what I interpret as the teaching and the lessons and the deep sort of insights from ayahuasca was very much what I experienced on DMTx, which was a huge surprise to me. I did not expect that at all. So there was a sense of when it came in initially, those first 2 or 3 minutes were very similar, like I said, to vaporizing DMT and just kind of a very intense rush. There were consistently after that, I would find myself in the same place, which was a kind of geometric cavern. It was always the same, and weirdly superimposed on that occasionally was a playground I'd walked past with my cousin like 3 months before that has no emotional resonance to me whatsoever, but it was always there. So there are kind of echoes, I think, of in Rick Strassman's study, this sense of a nursery that was there, but there wasn't a sense that anyone was in the nursery. There was almost like certainly an experience like a holding room. And then what would happen is I would break through that in some way, and then things would get extremely wild, and it would be extremely full of entities and full of encounters and full of different realms is what it felt like. It felt like there were often different portals to go through. However, the striking thing was, my first experience was very much around, an unresolved relationship in my life, and really going into the depths of that, which was very healing and totally unsurprising. And the message was sort of, you don't need to see aliens, you need to work on your stuff. And then that was a kind of a theme throughout, even though there were a lot of encounters until the last dosing, which was I won't go into now, but which was a very intense overview effect, would be the mystical experience I would describe. So and not really a lot of biographical stuff. But yeah, so it had a kind of teaching. I call it the teaching presence that I kind of interpreted, a kind of back and forth dialogue with whatever it might be, me, the DMT, something else. So that was quite a surprise. That's not something I've ever experienced from vaporizing DMT. It might just be because you don't have enough time to really land and make sense of what's going on. That was my sense of it.
Thank you. So Jack, it seems from what they just said that it's clear that there's a huge multiplicity of structure and of realms, they were saying, within this space that you were perhaps able to explore more thoroughly within the DMTx experience with this extended infusion. Was that kind of your experience too?
Well, there is a lot to say, but I think there's really an imperative of understanding the context as well, because we are trying to compare with a traditional DMT experience. Traditional DMT experience may be in a festival or in a room full of pillows and friends. Like, this really wasn't like that in any shape or form. Like, how I like to describe the DMT setup, that in many ways it's almost like alien abduction one-on-one. It's almost like a bad trip machine. You are literally being probed, and it's not figurative, it's literal. You are being probed, the blood being taken out of you every few minutes. You're in a bed surrounded by strangers in a clinic. Yeah, you're bound to have a different phenomenological experience. And that really needs to be stressed, because the context is intense in the DMT clinical setting. And for me, funnily enough, every single experience was quite different. There was some analogy between them, but they're very, very, very different. And yes, echoing Ali, yes, I also experienced a bit an ayahuasca-like narrative. And also, to me, it compared well enough to some aspects of ayahuasca, which I've experienced extensively as well. So depending on what monoamine oxidase inhibitor you use, you may tap into a similar space, whether it's phenolzine or moclobemide or Syrian root. And ingested crystal DMT can take you to a similar space for quite a few minutes, potentially even for the same amount of time as DMTx. So I'm starting to ponder whether an intravenous delivery is imperative or not. Although ayahuasca can be absolutely debilitating, even for the body, it is very strong in its experience, but we may not necessarily need to go the intravenous route. And if I have to go into details, for me, there's, funnily enough, the very first experience, the lowest dose, had the most distinct entity generation, while the other ones were a lot more chaotic than smoking DMT. And in some ways, it wasn't even as strong as vaporizing DMT, even at the highest dose. And now we know what the dosage is, and I think that at the level of blood concentrations of DMT, vaporized would still hit the receptors harder than DMTx. So we also need to take that into account. But yeah, for me, it was a mix of cognitive and the emotional developments, and that life review that Ali also talked about. There was a lot of problem solving, a lot of inquiry into my history, my problems, my traumas, my future opportunities. And the beauty of DMTx, similar to ayahuasca, is that it really gives you time to go past the initial ontological shock and really savor an actual real narrative within yourself. So that is definitely very special within DMTx.
Thank you very much, Jack. So Anton, it seems that with this extended protocol, it gives you more time. There is more of a narrative that can develop. There seems to be a greater opportunity to explore the various realms within the DMT space. Can you talk a little bit to that, Anton, whether it was the same for you compared to regular DMT?
Yeah, I'd like to start on the notion of the setting. You know, there were two unusual things here, one being in a hospital with cannulas in your arms and some life support crew nearby. And the other one, of course, is at the time of taking it, it's undisclosed. So whereas when you're smoking, you know when you're going in, here you're lying, waiting. It was what felt like a very long wait. The thing that shocked me was when it hit me from the ends of my toes to the top of my head, instantly, there was an energetic force. And this wasn't like having an injection in your arm where you get a warmth across your chest or a taste of metal in your mouth. It was instant everywhere. If my energetic field had somehow been turned on like a bulb. So that I was very disorientated at the beginning. I didn't know who I was, where I was, what I was. And it took, and of course you lose time. It took some time to remember being in a taxi. Then I worked out I was in a taxi on Earth, human being. Where was I going? Oh, Imperial. Oh shit, I'm the guy in the experiment right now. And then I settled down. And the sense of intensity was about 8 out of 10. There were entities around me instantly, and I'll come on to those. In terms of assimilation, I think that's what you're talking about, Andrew. How do you assimilate? How do you get comfortable so that you can then become an explorer or navigate? You know, I'd spent another 2 hours in there because it was really good. I assimilated well. There was a swerve about halfway through when I went from 8 to 9 because I shifted. No, I didn't. The experience shifted from one place to another set of entities altogether, completely different. And that sort of upset me at that moment because I couldn't quite work out how or why it was shifting. But to answer your question, yeah, I think if you're in there and, you know, you're comfortable, you just wish you could stay in longer. You know, I was at a good point in exploring well.
Did you get the sense that you were able to, in some sense, intentionally navigate and explore, or were you simply carried or thrown around?
Mainly not carried or thrown around. I mean, I find that in terms of, and it's regular for me, in terms of position, I'm usually on what seems to be the floor. I'm probably bodiless, but the way the entities are looking at me, they're looking down. And the analogy I give is the wounded pigeon in London. The little children come running up going, oh, look, there's a wounded pigeon. And then the adults go, no, leave it alone, leave it alone. Being, we're not sure if he's dead or whether he's on DMT, let's check. But there's a sort of
wow
around you, and you're just sitting there and their world is going on around you. I've had other moments where you can navigate, you can move, you know, intentionally, but it's not like walking. You sort of imply a movement forward and you move forward. So that was
okay. Thank you, Anton. So perhaps I'll just so I'm jumping through the questions here because of time, but perhaps just
Can I
Carl.
ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was wondering if in any of you for the effects, you know, the intensity tapered, if, you know, there was tolerance over the space of the infusion.
Yeah, Carl, do you want to answer that?
I think it stayed pretty much at a very, I mean, it's only 30 minutes, right? So you're not experiencing tolerance. I think it's interesting, and the paper from Lisa actually acknowledged that the heart rate seems to stabilize. I think that's true. I think the intensity, I mean, if I think about my experience, yeah, there's definite phases to the experience, and you could argue that the end of the experience is a little bit less intense, I would say, Rick.
And while I've got you there, Carl, so many people have been sort of asking, and they said, you know, well, you know, a 3-minute DMT trip feels like 100 years. Does a 30-minute DMT trip feel like 100,000 years? Or I know, as you told me, that they actually told you they were communicating with you about the time. So, but did you sense that this was a longer trip? Do you think you would have felt like this was longer than normal? speak if they hadn't told you?
Yeah, even being told the time, I mean, you can't really register time in the same way, and there's certainly phases that you're going through that seem to defy a sense of time. But in terms of my experience, I would, have a world space where I'm very much in a different ontological experience, and then there's a window onto that world space, and then, as Ali was saying, there's like a mirror space where you're really just being shown your own life, and it's very moral. It's certainly not recreational. I think the message I was receiving is live well. You've won the jackpot being human, and it's kind of revered in the whole cosmos, but it's a super short experience. So don't get caught up in trying to hoard stuff, because you're literally in a dream state and you're passing through. But yeah, sort of get to know yourself as a light object or a light being, so you can build the solar body to pass through death intact. So very much the message of human equals jackpot, void equals norm. And yeah, in terms of time, it was very much, I think there's more time there because there's more space there. You're sort of being unfolded into different types and different forms of space, different forms of consciousness, different ontologies of being. I think that what they are, if there's a they have very different ontologies on that side. Thinking, feeling, being are what we consider existence here. I think they have very different forms of that on their side.
Okay, thanks, Carl. So clearly there's this sense from all of you so far that you are receiving information, right? There's certainly whatever form that might take. A question again that a lot of people are asking is, many people really do struggle. The information kind of floods through them at a great rate, and then when they get back, it's all gone. Terence McKenna used to say it like liquid gold dripping through your fingers or something. You really struggle to hold on and to recall your trip, and I think many people, including myself, struggle with that. So perhaps Ali, do you think that being in there longer, did that help or hinder your actual recall and your ability to actually bring information and recall the details of the experience when you came back?
Yeah, it did. It did definitely help, because there's more of a narrative. There's an actual process, and there's different encounters, and one thing leads to another, sometimes in very unexpected ways, and so that's quite memorable. Also, without giving too much detail about the study design, we did recount what happened very shortly afterwards, and that actually helps tremendously. And I believe Chris Bash, who wrote LSD in the Mind of the Universe, who he did like 70 LSD trips over 20 years or so. He used to do that. The next day, he would sit with the same music in the same position and recount. It's incredibly effective at making sure that you remember what's happened. So that was very useful. For me personally, I also was by the fifth dosing, which was the fourth one that wasn't a placebo, so the fourth actual dosing, I was already writing my book, which is coming out next month, and in it I recount a lot of my dosings. And so I had this sort of decentered mindset of, I'm sort of paying attention to my experience in order to recount it. That was, though, consistent for all of us in some way, because like Carl said, we were being asked to rate in real time bits of the experience. So what that does is it forces you to decenter, so to take a step back from the content of your experience and watch it sort of objectively. And that also helps a lot as well, because if you're asked entities yes or no, and you go, I'll talk about that later, but that question became somewhat absurd at certain points. But for example, asking to rate your anxiety, 0 to 10, you have to check in with yourself and go, okay, how am I doing right now? How am I feeling? What's going on? One time I gave a rating and an entity, I was like 4, and the entity was like, really, 4? Is that all? And I was, it was quite, it's quite memorable. Yeah. So yeah, basically I would say it helped quite a bit to be there longer as well. It's just the whole story was unfolding. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me that part of the initial shock also is going to disrupt your ability to recall these things. Whereas if you can form a narrative and you can the brain likes stories, the brain likes narratives rather than just lots and lots of kind of a flood of information. So it makes more sense. So that's kind of cool. That's what we were kind of hoping, that it would be a much better way for people to bring information back from the experience. So
Jump in quickly.
Yes, of course.
I think that there's two different ways to look at this. And I think that DMTx both makes it easier to recall information and harder. Because like when you're just smoking DMT in one bolus, you are given this very intense and dense, and then you come out and you can riff on that. When you are in an experience for about an hour, sometimes you get kind of saturated with images and also somewhat exhausted. So that when you come out of it, you have all of these slides that are packed onto one another, and you may be able to recall some bits and pieces that were the most salient or intense, but it's not that you can recall the whole hour. A lot of things kind of get fused together and morphed, and so I wouldn't want to give the idea to the listeners that you can just go through a whole hour of DMT just reviewing it. A lot of things can get very, very confusing, and it's a little bit like dream recall as well. And so sometimes the value of just having a prepackaged, intense and short experience can actually help with recall. And in terms of DMT tolerance, the DMTx protocol also has some nuanced limitations, in the sense that at the beginning you are given a big bolus, and then there is an infusion thereafter. So this actually discombobulates your ways to assess intensity. And so for me, the first two experiences, there was a tapering off. Like, in fact, the very first, I had like a pretty shocking first surge that then would go down. And I would really struggle to see whether my system was actually adapting, or I received much more DMT during the bolus than during the infusion, which is totally possible. And on the highest doses, instead, there was no tapering whatsoever. It plateaued quite well. So I would definitely try to look at under that lens. But yeah, I think it's both easier and harder to recall. And at the level of time, I was time aware all of the times. And that pinging every minute or so about the experience, of course, anchors you even further. So until we have a true infusion with no external stimulus, we may not be able to tell really whether time distortion is really occurring or not. It's pure speculation at this point.
Yeah, it seems like, as Timothy Leary attempted to do back in the 60s, we need some way of real-time communication, some kind of system, perhaps with advances in things like AI and stuff. This kind of thing might become possible, or a neural readout people are talking about, but I think we're quite a long way from that kind of thing. Okay, so I am cognizant of time, so I'm just going to kind of ask one final question before I will hand over to Graham for the end. So at the end of your DMTx sessions, did any of you experience any kind of unexpected or unusual after effects that you weren't expecting? Okay, you're nodding your head there, Ali, so maybe you just want to continue briefly.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I know Anton didn't get to answer the last one. Yeah, I mean, for
Yeah.
me, the after effects, particularly between the first and the second dosing, are very intense synchronicity experiences. So, in fact, that were in some ways more intense and stranger than any of the dosings, except perhaps the last dosing. So yeah, a sense of, and I think this is something I've certainly heard people report, particularly with ayahuasca. So I don't know if it's a quality of the after effect of DMT, but you could explain some of those experiences as me being more heightened and seeing more connections in the world, sort of heightened. But I also had experiences where I, thought I recognized someone, went over to the street, turned out not to be them, but that person had killed themselves 2 days before, who I thought it was, who I didn't even know that well. Like, really weird stuff, really weird. So that was actually much harder to make sense of and to sort of stay agnostic about and practice a kind of internal science around than a lot of the actual experiences. So I think there is an interesting research to be done around synchronicity experiences and DMTx specifically, because I think the longer you're in, perhaps it enhances it in some way.
Interesting. So, Carl, I know you had a particularly strange after effect, if I'm right.
Yeah, well, many actually. I think I would call them abilities more than effects. But one thing was definitely a sense of precognition inside the experience. So seeing my future mind state, having done a lot of interesting experiments with other substances, very intentionally, but maybe pushing the boundaries a bit too far, and seeing 6 months hence where that would take me. So really not understanding what was being shown to me in the DMT experience, but then living it 6 months later. And what was super fascinating was then Jack actually came to me after one of his DMT infusions and warned me about the experiments that I was doing, that they may be taking me down the wrong path. So that was doubly interesting, that he was also having some sort of maybe precognition as well. But other experiences, I would say, certainly a greater ability in telepathy was something that I experienced afterwards. I think one of the main things that happens to you is telepathic communication inside the DMT journeys with the entities. That seems to be the way that they communicate with you. So that again was some sort of literacy that I developed, and I think that was enhanced because of the extended state. Overview effects, I think, having this kind of multiplicity understanding of consciousness and understanding that, we live in one timeline, but maybe there are multiple timelines that we're not normally available, that aren't normally available to our limited bandwidths. Also vision, having 360 vision. When I was having that experience with the cracked 5-MeO DMT experience, revealing the multiplicity of unities, I was actually given a key. I was actually given a key inside the experience, and it was being delivered through these sort of tentacles in multiple places, but I had to physically grab it from behind me. So I had like 360 vision at that point. And the final one was kind of this double consciousness where when I'm having to relay to Chris and Lisa the intensity ratings, I'm hearing my voice in the physical space in a very different kind of way than I'm experiencing it in the DMT space. So there you go.
Fascinating. So it seems like you're developing is like almost like ascension. You are developing into a spiritual being in a kind of way, or you're getting closer to that through this DMTx. It's almost like a training period for your consciousness, which is kind of fascinating. I had no idea that these sort of things would be experienced at all. So perhaps we'll finish before I hand over to Graham. Anton, did you notice any after effects? A lot of people are talking about effects on dreaming. Did you experience changes in your dreams, Anton, after DMTx, or any other effects?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo Ali a little bit. What I found, as I find with the commitment to ayahuasca, is that synchronicities seem to start from the moment you make the decision to attend. And I've noticed that if you book in an ayahuasca retreat or session 2-3 months ahead, the moment you've made the intentful decision to be there, something starts happening. And I very much found this when I committed to partake in the experiment. And then, of course, so it's almost as if the molecule knows you're coming and force working with you, guiding you, bringing you along. So I found that was very strong. And then the other thing, the entities showed me they had what looked like little iPads. They were trying to show me these images. I'm very excited about these images, and I kept saying, what are they? And I couldn't understand them at all, but it was geometric shapes and, looked like hieroglyphs. And they seemed to think I should know, but I didn't know. But I kept seeing these things for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'd see that imagery, whether it was in nature or whether it was in pictures or wherever. I'd go, oh, I've seen that. That was the thing they were showing me. So there was some sort of language going on in that.
Did you try and draw it?
Sorry?
Did you try and draw these images?
I did draw it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and I've got the drawings, and there was a shuddering moment 4 days later when somebody was showing us at a conference these alchemical sort of descriptions, and it looked like 2 or 3 of those. And in fact, you were there, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's so I was shocked that there was some language. And then the other thing was I woke very, very early the following morning with really beautiful clarity of mind, a connection to sort of what Carl was saying. I felt connected to everything, and sat down and actually had much more of a memory recall at 5:30 a.m. rather than when I got home that evening. I think I was just exhausted because it's a very long day, but yeah, that was it.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you, everyone. So I think we get a really good picture now of what the DMTx experience was like for the panel, kind of the general form and structure and progression of this extended state infusion. But of course, we're all interested, particularly, it's not so much where you go when you take DMT, but who you meet there. I think we'll all agree with that. So I think we'd really like to get on to talking about the entities now. So I think we should move swiftly on to Sir Graham of Hancock, who will lead the discussion from here.
Well, look, I'd like to begin not so much with a question, but with a philosophical point, which might develop into a question. We're all in this conversation people who have experienced DMT and experienced the effects of DMT. In my case, I've not had the opportunity for the extended state DMT, but I've had plenty of experiences of smoked and vaped DMT, and of course, ayahuasca is the active ingredient being DMT. The philosophical point I want to make is there are certain common or shared experiences, and the question then becomes for me: are we opening a doorway in some way onto a seamlessly convincing parallel universe inhabited by intelligent entities? In other words, is our experience an experience of something real? And that raises questions as to what real is and what reality is. Or is it some kind of archive which is stored on our DNA and we're gaining access to it in the altered state of consciousness? Or is it none of the above? Is it just our brains on drugs coming up with these fantastical experiences? And where I find myself opposed to the notion that it's just our brains on drugs is that I don't see how evolution would have created a brain module that would be activated in this situation. I don't see the utility of it. For example, an example I often give is intuitive physics. We all have intuitive physics. We all can deflect an object thrown at us, even though a very complicated mathematical calculation is there. And you can understand in evolutionary terms why that's there. But why would there be a brain module for seeing entities that are part animal, part human in form, and which communicate with us telepathically? This to me suggests more that we're entering something real and separate and freestanding. And so that's the first question I'd like to ask all the volunteers, one at a time, is what's your hunch? What's your guess that you're interfacing with when you enter this experience, whatever we call it? I'll start with you, Carl.
Thanks, Graham, for a great question. I think it's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think whether we are or are not experiencing a parallel reality, even if it is just our imaginations, that just proves the magnificence of our imagination. My hunch, having done the DMT extended state for 3 months, and what a privilege it was to be invited to do so, I think is that it's a mystery school, that there's certainly something going on, and there do seem to be these reliable portals that are available for us, and whether that is something, because what I experience is something that's super holographic. It looks digital. It looks like virtual reality, so to a certain extent. And what I persistently see is this language that's there at the core of my vision, whether it's on DMT or DMT extended. I'm seeing entities made of this language, and what I would have loved to have done was actually draw whilst in the experience. And I think that idea that we do remain intact and we do remain ourselves, essentially, where we do have the ability to sketch and potentially do other things. And I think that's the promise of DMT extended, that we can investigate. We become investigators onto consciousness, onto these phenomenologies that could well be, whether it's ourselves in the future, whether it is a parallel reality. I think that what DMTx offers is an opportunity to really, and Jack's right. I mean, there are other ways of extending the state with other medicines, etc. I think but DMTx seems to me to be an interesting space, but not for the faint-hearted, I would add. I think that these things are very much for those, just like the Greek mystery schools. It wasn't around how much money you had, whether you got into the school. It was how emotionally available, how mature you were to actually be part of this.
Anton, turning to you, is it a parallel universe? Is it an archive stored somewhere in our brains, or is it just our brains on drugs?
I don't think, well, it is our brains on drugs. It's just where the drugs are taking us, what key they are to a certain portal. I'm personally convinced it's not not imagination. And people would sometimes say, is it Jungian archetypes? What are Jungian archetypes? And I think this is a portal to another realm of existence. And these entities seem to have a message for us. Who are they? Are they the realm of the dead? Are they the realm of us in the future, not made of matter, organic form, and now communicating with us? The thing I like most about it is the military notion of KISS, keep it simple, stupid. There exists this compound on Earth. It is ubiquitous. It's in us. It's in plants. It's everywhere. And the only thing we know that it does is take people to an extraordinary other place. Mm-hmm. Only assume, therefore, that some type of creative force, whether that's cosmic mind, God, advanced aliens, or the computer programmer for this simulation, has put it here to allow us to communicate in some way with it or its emissaries. So I think this is an extraordinary communication device, which is why the experiments are so exciting. And NASA might be spending billions sending rockets to space. What we're doing in this little experiment is probably far greater in terms of understanding of the nature of our existence.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, that's my hunch as well. Ali, what's your take on this?
Yeah, probably like all of us, this is something I've wrestled with a lot. But I think it's both. But I actually think certainly where it brought me was to kind of asking the question, okay, well, is the universe made of stuff, matter, or is it made of mind? And like many people, and there's actually research by Chris Timmerman from a different project, looking at the fact that people shift to a more panpsychist or idealist view, and more of a view of the world being made of mind after taking psychedelics, unless they're staunch materialists to begin with, in which case they don't shift very much. But then also, Johns Hopkins has more recently.
It would be just picking you up at that point. It would be fascinating if Richard Dawkins would undertake a DMTx experience as a staunch materialist.
That would be amazing. Let's get on that, actually. Yeah. So basically, I do think we are entering I'm going to say distinct reality. That was very much my experience. That was very much my intuition. I do think we overlay a lot onto it to make sense of it. So I actually had a few experiences in DMTx and also elsewhere, of having a sense that the way I was interpreting what I was seeing was a lot of my own projection onto something. And there was even a moment in the DMTx.
But again, to pause you, that's true of all experiences, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Whether the experience is mediated by DMT or not, we can construe it in terms of our own frame of reference.
Exactly, yeah. So we both went to Paris and we came back with different stories, and someone asked us, is Paris real? Yeah, Paris is real, but we have different Parises as well. But there is a Paris there, so I think there is something there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
How about you, Jack? What's your view on this mystery?
Well, I like to be devil's advocate in every direction. I have seen a lot of entities in my life, and I have been privileged to see entities in altered states other than DMT as well. There's other substances that can create complex entities.
Mm-hmm.
They are far more technical and somewhat dangerous. But I have seen entities as complex and coherent and incredible as with DMT, both with them, but also in the realm of dreaming. Like I've always been, a lucid dreamer since I was a child. And even to date, some of my more radical lucid dreams appear even more magical and incredible than DMT. So then that, poses the question, are we naturally equipped to travel to alternative realities through different modalities? Or is this simply our brain desperate to generate meaning out of the overwhelming amount of information we are presented with? And we know that as humans, we can only really tune in into less than 0.1 of all information there is. And then we have to extract constructs out of it. We have to make sense of it. We have to generate autonomous entities within our mind to interact with. And having experienced this through so many different channels, and especially during dreaming, I personally don't know. And I really keep my mind as agnostic as possible, even for the sake of my own sanity, because for me, encountering entities is quite frequent. And it's not just relegated to DMT, and I don't really know what to do about it. It can be really overwhelming, and it can be so consistent, so coherent, so precise. And especially if one is stuck in a lucid dream for a long time, the level of interaction, the level of responsiveness, the level of language. One of my most recent lucid dreams, I could operate my phone and select the apps, and the apps would operate exactly. Characters would be all weird. They were like a mixture of like Latin and Hebrew, or just like Predator, like symbols. And there was no drug involved at that point, but it was just so pure and so stable. Like I could stare at the details for minutes on end, and I could move my head around, and the whole dreamscape would just stay stable, interactive, and alive. So I really don't know. Like I have been both a materialist and an idealist, and I try to stay context dependent. And I try to focus more on what's useful than what is true. And in terms of making the most of DMT for personal growth and inspiration and quality of life, or extracting just information, we are faced with a very powerful modality that is really informing us a lot about what we are capable of as biological processing units or antennas or whatever it is that we want to talk about. But so I personally don't know, and I could resonate with all answers really, and find 1,000 different rationalizations for all of them.
Yeah. Do you guys compare notes after the session? I mean, after ayahuasca sessions, it's typical to have a sharing. Do you have something similar with the DMTx, or do you talk to each other once you're out of the experimental setting about what you've experienced? Start with you, Jack.
In terms of sharing, I mean, we were not really allowed to talk much publicly about what we went through for a while, because of the rules of of the study. Yeah, of course, behind closed doors, we shared bits and pieces, and we found resonance. Whether there was an actual connection between us or not, I'm not sure. Like as Carl mentioned, I did have him in one of my visions, and had a premonition or a simulation that maybe some of what he was going through triggered me and scared me, and so then I felt compelled to communicate with him about it, and there was some meaning there. There was some salient exchange about the contexts that we were talking about, whether this is just the fact that we are good friends and we interact with each other more than the next person, or there was an actual portal open there. It's hard to say.
I suppose the reason I'm asking the question, just to move on, is it possible? I want to ask you each specifically an entity question, but is it possible that your experiences communicated with one another have had an influence upon, has person A's experience of an entity had an influence on person B's experience of an entity, if you share these experiences? Let me put that question to Carl, because we talked for a moment.
Thanks, Graham. So you're asking whether there's some sort of stability with entity encounters between us.
Yeah, or whether, I'd like to come to that, but first of all, I want to know whether you've shared amongst yourselves the entity encounters that you've had, and whether there's any risk that this would influence the entity encounters of the person you're sharing with.
Yeah, so as Jack said, we were sort of sworn to secrecy around this stuff, not just between ourselves, but to the wider world. And obviously, there's great interest in this experiment, so it was very difficult to not talk about it. But we all managed to keep it, and this is like the first time we've been able to talk about it publicly. So, yeah, it's a great question. I think you know, priming. If we were to talk about you can see why we weren't allowed to talk about it. Chris and Lisa, the Imperial team, didn't want people primed to. I mean, Terence McKenna is probably the worst example, isn't it? The self-dribbling elves. If you don't get self-dribbling elves after listening to Terence, then you think you're not tripping.
Yeah. So the question, the next question I have is, ask each one of you what, and I'll start with you, Carl, since I'm on you at the moment. What is if you could pick from the range of entity encounters that you've had, I assume there's been a range, what's the single most powerful encounter that you had? Describe that entity.
I think it was, you know, there's certainly a greater resolution of entities as you're going through the dosing sessions. But for me, it was very much the alien. It wasn't one entity. It was this alien. It felt like a co-opting of the space by foreign entities, and whether that was just because I was being sort of taken out of the traditional DMT space into a bridging between the DMT and the 5-MeO DMT space, and then actually being taken beyond the white room of the 5-MeO DMT space and shown that there's not just one type of unity, but there's a multiplicity of unities, and maybe that points towards the multiverse or whatever. But yeah, I think it's tribes of entities rather than single entities that I'm always experiencing. I never, apart from when I'm given a key by this sort of octopus, like with all the tentacles, I think that it's much more about tribes. And yeah, one experience was this idea of an interspecies splicing. So I felt like I had become sort of morphed into a sort of a dinosaur shape. And you know, the on the other side, it maybe I'm interspecies splicing with an actual animal type. It's also consuming DMT, maybe on a different planet, and we're literally like swapping bodies. So suddenly that animal gets to see inside the hospital world.
Yeah, Anton, would you describe your most powerful entity experience during this series of experiments?
Yes, I mean, it hasn't been the most powerful experience that I've ever had with DMT, particularly with ayahuasca. And I would describe this experience as bounding into 90 minutes after the beginning of an ayahuasca session. You're just suddenly there at the strongest moment. And it's that assimilation that's very tricky to get. And I remember with the automated voice saying entities, yes or no. And I'd been saying no, no, no. And then suddenly I'm surrounded by them. My little voice was, yes. It was like suddenly being somebody saying, are the tigers there yet? And you go, yes, but please be quiet. I don't want them to know because they're all around you. What I found, and I follow the same notion of the tribe, what I tend to see very regularly is this group of humanoid forms that don't really fit into the Terence McKenna sort of description. They're almost gingerbread men-like. They are distinguishable from each other, but the noses are flat, the eyes don't really open, but somehow they're seeing. There are children and adults, and it's a grouping. And you seem to have just arrived at their place, their home, their village, whatever. And I refer back to that comment about being the wounded pigeon. You evaluate yourself because the children look down at you, as do the adults. And then the adults then push the children back and say, leave it alone. And usually two male adults will come across, and they always seem to look at the back of me. And I can't work out because I don't have a neck or arms or legs. But my guess is they're looking to see if a cord or a connection has been severed. And I can only guess into this because it's so regular that they're sort of assessing, has this essence, this soul, this spirit, whatever it might be, this consciousness, has it died and left organic earth or left the realm of matter and arrived in the realm of light? Or is it just a tourist passing through on DMT or the like? And they sort of, and if as they see it, the cord must be there, they tend to sit on either side and watch what I'm looking at, almost like guardians or protectors in some strange way. So that's the sort of regular thing that happens. What swerved with me on this one was I had them and they were very keen to show me these tablets with all this information. And you get a little bit frustrated because you can't download. Mm-hmm. And they're so excited to share, and you keep saying, "What is it? What does it mean? What does it mean?" And they're just grinning at you, and you can't grasp it. But it's obviously very important. And then I swerved, which took me up to 9 out of 10 in intensity, and arrived in this very beautiful pastoral environment where there were 10-foot tall, sort of Mr. Zeus, orangutangy, hairy type entities with their children, with what looked like trees and waterfalls, but weren't. And it was beautifully pastoral. It was sort of like one of those Attenborough documentaries when they've arrived in a village or at a group of monkeys, and the monkeys or the villagers are aware that the cameraman's there, that the tourist is there, but they're not interested. They're just in bliss. And it was the sort of download I got then was that this was primal being. This is how we should be, just being in this existence, in beauty, in nature, connected. So that was it for that experience.
Okay, Jack, you made a point earlier that in a way what's more important to you is what's useful than what's true, or than establishing what is true. Could you A, describe your most powerful entity encounter, and B, what was useful about it for you?
Well, during DMTx were harder to pinpoint. They were all around me. It was an ecosystem of them. It was a jungle of them. There was a distinctive matrix-like robotic ensemble of tentacles, cables, cogs, all around me, just interwoven in the visual aspect. Funnily enough, the most distinct entities for me that I could just look at and see for what they were at the very lowest dose, which is very strange, where I just got shocked for the first 10 minutes by some of the most distinct entities. And the one I can remember was like some kind of elfish creature, humanoid, with quite delicate features, very clean faced and petite kind of structure, and was operating or reshuffling some kind of material or equipment in front of me. And so there was not much acknowledgement. I am rarely acknowledged by the entities. It does happen occasionally where they would be showing me their world or welcoming me into, but that's rare. They're usually doing their thing and I'm just witnessing. And this was very much the case for me during the DMTx as well. And that was particularly aesthetic and impressive as usual. But at the level of making use of it, it's not easy. These are very much like films that I'm watching of some kind of autonomous entity doing their thing in their own world, abiding to their own narratives, their own motives. And I very rarely manage to make a connection to the mundane, the mundane day-to-day that I may be living in my, human experience. Like the most meaningful things are usually emotional, where I am reminded that a lot of my problems and a lot of my worries and fears are somewhat banal in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And that they are telling me that there is a deeper cosmic purpose to all of us. And that channel can be consolidated through a DMT experience. Whether that's DMTx or ayahuasca, it may not matter. In fact, for me, the afterglow or the repercussions afterwards that I did not discuss prior is a relative sense of wellness. An afterglow that would persist for a few days afterwards, in which I felt that I was reminded of some intrinsic purpose in life, and that I could connect with that at a personal level in a way that transcends what I perceive to be my problems and my shortcomings. And so by the end of it all, I could feel like I could do DMTx even once a month, as almost in the way someone would do an IV therapy session with vitamins, but with DMT instead, like a certain type of check-in and reboot in terms of value systems and value attribution in terms of what's useful on a day-to-day.
Now, going back to the question of the reality status of all of this, I've tried to establish whether there's been a lot of chatter between you volunteers afterwards. But the question I want to ask, and this, I'll ask this to Carl first. The question I want to ask is, have any of you experienced the same or similar entities? Or is each person's experience isolated to themselves with no common points with the other experiencers' experiences? Carl, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think having this discussion today is super useful. And even though Jack and Ali and I have spoken with Anton hosting a session at the Turing Initiative recently, this is much more in depth. And I think that maybe we're not experiencing the same entities, but we're certainly experiencing the same phenomenologies. And I think that that's super interesting. And I think ultimately we will benefit from having much more of a deep dive. This is why I think that drawing things immediately afterwards, I think would be a benefit. And even during, I think that the ability to draw this stuff out and to then identify these entities, for me, it's very hard to, as I mentioned, to identify individual identities of entities. There's vast quantities, much more than you would normally imagine could fit in a space. And they always come in multiples for me. So it's difficult to then identify them.
You mentioned that you had developed some new abilities, including telepathy, and this is a question I'd like to put to all of the volunteers. Has novelty emerged from these experiences? Have you Carl, have already answered this question in the sense that you felt that your telepathic abilities, of course, that's something that materialist science would sneer at immediately, but we're hopefully beyond that very narrow mindset here. That your experience was that telepathic contact increased following this experience. I would regard that as novelty, something new that came into your life. And I want to ask the other volunteers, starting with Jack, has novelty come out of this for you? Have you learned something new that you didn't know before, that you couldn't possibly have known before?
For me, novelty came mostly as a result of developing a new skill. As I discussed, I've been through entities and extended DMTs of various forms before, but during the DMTx experience, by I would say the third session, I had developed a skill that I did not know was quite available. Where I would say by the middle point of the third session, I returned into my body. So during smoked DMT, it's usually a pretty overwhelming and debilitating experience in which you're surrounded by very strong vision, but you're semi-paralyzed and you can't quite operate. You're almost like kidnapped by the experience. And that was very much my experience forever. Even ayahuasca, it can be quite crippling in many ways, and so is ayahuasca. But by DMTx, the third session, I returned into my body. And all of a sudden, I could experience a full breakthrough with all of the entities around me and the absolutely overwhelming visions. But I could move. I could raise my head. I could look left and right. And by the fourth session, I knew that I could have even stood and walked around if I wanted to. I became in full control over my body. So I could now operate.
You could have walked around in this realm in your body,
yes,
while continuing to experience the DMT realm, if that's what we're going to call it.
Exactly. Like I could have never possibly imagined that the body could have learned to navigate, like stabilizers on a bike, let's say. By my third session, I felt I could remove the stabilizers, and I could have simply treated the breakthrough as augmented reality, and that for me was an absolute breakthrough.
And do you think this new ability is something that you could cultivate further? And if you did, what would be the benefits of doing so?
100%. Like that was a certain level of like my body became capable of reactivating systems that evolution usually suspends in times of critical crisis. So this parallels a lot my experience with skydiving. I'm a professional skydiver, or at least I have my own rig. I've done it hundreds of times, and at the beginning you're mostly just floating and trying to keep it together and deploy the parachute and not die. But after many dozens flights, your body comes back and you start savoring the movements between your arms. You can flip, you can fly in the directions, you can think about your life. The richness of the integration between all of the different aspects of you as a human become available. And I experienced exactly the same after my third session of DMTx, in a way that then I could simply gain access to more parts of me in a meaningful and coherent manner. So that seems to me extremely useful in different contexts. And I have experienced even more recently where I've had a breakthrough of DMT smoked, and I felt that for some reason my bladder was going to explode, and I managed to run towards the bathroom and have a leak in a full breakthrough. So problem solving, managing my bodily functions, not make a mess of any bathroom while being surrounded by entities. So that to me is something that I could have never possibly imagined possible, and it is possible. And yeah, the DMTx experience seems the cleanest way to be guided towards the learning, that kind of ability that is very, very precise, very clean. It's not whimsical.
That's novelty. That's a new skill. That's a new ability that can be cultivated further. How about you, Anton? Novelty? Have you learned new things from your experiences?
Yeah, well, yes, a couple of things. I'd just like to revert back to your notion of suggestibility, of us talking to each other and whether we got any, was there any suggestibility? I don't think there was any at all. I mean, I know all the guys on the call, but there was nothing where anyone said anything or we saw identical entities. So that didn't happen, Graham, just, to say that. What I found...
sorry to interrupt you, but will there be, as part of the process of working this whole thing out, will there be a point in the investigation where you set down the exact experiences you've had and close comparisons can be made between the experiences of the different volunteers? Is that happening?
Well, we were there, each of us were there for a full day. There's interviews that go on for a long time afterwards and tests that you have to go through,
right,
including MRI, the whole thing. So I leave that to Chris and Lisa. They've got all the reports from each of us on what happened, what we experienced. It's a very thorough process. So I imagine, yes, at some stage there may be that, but we need to ask them.
I mean, it would be interesting if three of you all met the same entity.
Yes, well, that's what I'm hoping is going to happen at some stage, but we've got to get to that point. But yes, that's my hope.
But to return to the novelty issue.
Sorry?
To return to the novelty issue.
Yeah. What I noticed was a dramatic increase in synchronicity. I've had some mind-blowing synchronicities, and just as an example, there was a business in America that we were looking to do something with business-wise. We didn't know anything about them, but we just liked the business.
Mm-hmm.
And a passport was found outside my house on a path in the snow in January. So I brought the passport into the house, thought, crikey, it's an American, I better try and track this fellow down. And lo and behold, it was the chief exec and founder of this particular business.
Wow.
Now, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it is. But when I eventually found the guy, I said, this isn't 1 in a billion. This must be 1 in, I don't know, a trillion. But where, why, how, what? And the fact that I brought that company up 5 or 10 times in my house talking about it is, anyway, bizarre stuff. But an increase in synchronicities, I think. And then on a personal level, a sense of gratitude to the magnificence of existence and the great mystery that there is. It provoked in me to go off on a 8-day trip of solitude and vision quest in the desert, which I just did recently, in nothing homage to the creator force for the magnificence of this extraordinary life we live in, and the great mystery that it is. So that was a sort of, if you like, a deepening to the soul connection.
Yes. It seems sad that that the vast majority of human beings will never have the opportunity to experience these explorations.
Well, we're at the beginning, Graham. Part of all this effort, yours, particularly ours, everybody on this call and on this panel, is to act as catalysts to try and create a world where maybe this was possible, just as it was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. I'm one of these people that goes, when I hear, oh, it's not for everyone, I go, no, it's probably not for 5 or 10% of the population, people with psychotic illnesses and the like, but it is really for everyone.
Yes.
Go out and have a go. And there was an exceptional article in ICEERS last week that talked about bad trips. And the essence of it, there's no such thing as a bad trip. There's a hard truth. It's a hard truth. I look at all my bad trips. I've had terrible trips, but they always afterwards, I learned something from them. And I'm grateful to them.
They're grateful the most important ones. They're where we learn the most. Yeah.
So, have the courage, go in, try it. That's it.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have a world we can.
Ali, coming to you, novelty in your encounters? Did you learn something new?
Yeah, certainly there's a few different levels of it, I suppose. I mean, the synchronicity experiences, I guess, are kind of the tip of maybe a deeper iceberg of a sense of attunedness to the world, which was quite different afterwards than before DMTx. So there's the kind of meaningful coincidences, but then I also had some experiences which honestly feel kind of animistic, a sense of being in Shropshire and walking and feeling this intense presence sort of rushing towards me and then kind of spinning around, which led me to kind of change direction and led to a few other things happening that day. a few experiences like that, and then again a sense of communicating somehow with some kind of non-physical something, right? And trying to also make sense of those experiences and not jump to any meaning making or conclusions. But I would say that it's made me more open to an animistic way of seeing things, and also the sense that I'm fascinated listening to everyone else, because this is the deepest we've gone in sharing our experiences. So a few of us have said something around different tribes or an ecosystem. That was a very significant part of my final dosing, was actually when everything really clicked together, is when I was looking at all these different entities that were vastly different, really enthusiastic, hyperdimensional chinchillas that I was trying to communicate with, followed by, gigantic squid that didn't care I was there at all. And I had the sense that, these are different, they're in a different niche. That squid is in a different ecological niche than the chinchillas.
Yes.
And that was the thing that really became really fascinating line of inquiry and teaching that I received. And that has stuck with me, because the lesson there was that, we talk a lot about entering their space, like going into the DMT realm. But of course, in a lot of animistic cultures, the two realms are blended together. And yes, we do step in and out, but I've started to think of it more so that it's our space as well. We just don't really know how to be in there, and we're not in there consciously. So that was a big shift, because that opened up a whole different way of seeing everything, and a real sense of, well, if somehow we are all connected to that realm of being in some way, what else are we connected to? And how might that affect what I'm doing in my day-to-day life? So in a sense, that's why it was partly why it was an overview effect, because it's also helped me to, and I think Jack mentioned this before, give less credence to my own personal woes. I had a message at one point, it was, that was, what doesn't really matter if the human race survives at all. So I was asking all these questions about, what can we do to get through the big problems we're facing? And the answer I got was, well, you could try this or try that, but, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So that sense of scale and vastness was really stayed with me quite a bit. So that, I think the key word is connectedness and a different relationality to the world.
On that subject of connectedness, I mean, there's two sides to this equation. There's the entities that we meet, and then there's us here on planet Earth smoking DMT. Now, normally those entities are used to people who've got the 10-minute rocket ship to the other side of reality that you get from vaping or smoking. And suddenly here you guys are going in for half an hour or maybe more. Was there any sense of awareness on the part of the entities that they would have more time to work with you?
Well, I think they would.
Sorry, go ahead, Anton.
Yeah, no, I think they wanted us to. I mean, certainly from my perspective, they were very keen to try and explain things. And as I came down, I wish I'd stayed in there longer, because the longer you're there, the more you assimilate, the greater the chance of trying to grasp or understand what it is they're trying to say. So, yes, I mean, one of the thoughts I'd always been aware of was whether they didn't want us to do this. But back in the day, first met you, should we be exploring entheogenic entity encounters? Is it part of the great mystery that you shouldn't go any further with? And never have I once found that the entities have said, no, don't do this or don't progress. They've always been quite excited that we've made it through. I see this as we're on the dawn of a new age if we can break through with.
Yeah, I think you're right. The question though is, was there a sense that the entities you were encountering were aware that they had more of your time, that they had a little more time to work with you than usual? Was there any difference in the extended experience to the smoked or vaped experience in that sense?
Not really for me. It was like going into an ayahuasca session 90 minutes in. They were there as long as I could hold on, and then I started to sort of disappear and come back.
Right. Carl, how about you on the same subject?
I think, I agree with Anton. It's difficult, but what was obvious to me was that they were aware how often I was coming back. as if to say, oh no, not you again. Like what are you doing coming back? And I think that what's interesting is that even though you have come back, maybe not very welcome, but they're like, well, you're here now, so we might as well do the work on you. And I think there is this sense of psychic surgery. I think we all come back with a sense of renewed health or vitality and an afterglow, and that's because there's some sort of work that's taking place, whether it's work that you're doing towards the latter end of my journeys, which is this mirroring effect when you're suddenly being shown how well you're doing in your relationships or in your in your productivity or whatever. I think that there's this sense of progress, and so there certainly seems to be some sort of continuity. And one of the most incredible experiences I had was being scanned. So interestingly, with this phase of the study, we're wearing this high density EEG cap, which is a lot less invasive than being in an fMRI situation. But when you are in an fMRI situation, the amount of entities that turn up, for me personally, I had so many entities, so much concern, and that they kind of revealed their benevolence because you're suddenly being scanned on this side, and they're the ones that are normally scanning you. So they're like, what's going on? Can we do anything to help? Are you dying? And then trying to calm down the entity. So I think that there's a certain use of technology that we can use as a honey trap to really increase this, because what I'm really picking up from all of us is that there's a sense of psychedelic literacy or apprenticeship going on, that maybe we can use certain technologies to attract more entities.
Yeah. I gather that we're running out of time, but so I want to ask each of you one more question, and that is, has your perspective on DMT or reality in general changed since your experiences? And do you have any final thoughts or feelings that you'd like to share with everyone before we move on to audience questions? And since you're there on screen, Carl, I'll begin with you, and then I'll go to Jack after you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, I'm always, even though I've sounded very positive, I think that we've got to keep in mind, even Huxley was saying that there's a danger of escaping into a nirvana apart from this world. And I reiterate that, to disagree with Ali, I think that the human experience is vital and extremely important. So I think that we need to avoid living elsewhere. I think that DMTx certainly has its place. I think that what we're seeing with AI, machine learning, the ability to record not just trips, but also dreams, could lead to a position where we just dream, wake up, review the dream, go back to sleep, carry on dreaming. So I think that these technologies have to be used very carefully with a lot of foresight as to the social implications. And we're all sort of in agreement that this can benefit humanity, but to what end? And altered states for what? We know we can program consciousness, but to what end? And I think what we're seeing with DMTx is that this ability to adjust the trip during the trip, so we can change the dose, increase the dose depending on what somebody's going through. I think that the curation of journeys is super interesting, and wouldn't it be interesting? Jack talks about getting up and walking around during a trip. I think he's right. I think that the further you go into an extended state, wouldn't it be interesting to try and fall asleep inside a DMT experience and then see what inception occurs?
A dream within a dream. Fascinating.
Absolutely.
Jack, the same question really to you. Has your perspective on DMT reality in general, has it changed since these experiences? And any thoughts or feelings that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, closing the latest loop, I actually had the privilege of experiencing DMT in my dream once. I had the serendipity of falling asleep during an ayahuasca ceremony immediately after drinking my cup, so before it kicked in. And so I had the experience of DMT acting upon me during a dream, which made the most otherworldly and crisp and vivid of dreams I can ever recall in my life. So I have had a DMT inception dream. So then I woke up in the ayahuasca experience, but I actually, the experience started for me in a dream, and incredibly powerful. At the level of like an ontological shift for me, I mean, there's the misleading factor that all of us, in many ways, are seasoned psychonauts. So it's not that I'm coming from a place where there was much to disrupt to start with. Definitely a further boost in the direction of panpsychism, for sure, in being agnostic to mysticism, in everything that can be, and being more detached to human narratives. And for me, a further drift towards the utilitarian / pragmatic approach to epistemology. So basically trying to understand, since we can experience so much and we have so little avenue for validation, we have all of these visions, but how do we know that they're true? How do we know that they are linked to anything that has any kind of like meaningful narrative in day-to-day reality? So a further imperative to bring this back into our lived experience, to try to understand what's actually useful, because through altered states we get showered with all these visions and knowledge and information, but the more we do that, the more we need to validate the information, and that is absolutely, it's very hard. And so this is why DMTx, I think it's an important technology that will become increasingly more important, but we have to make sure that this does not take us away from our human experience, that we don't create just a new biochemical Netflix, for lack of a better, where we basically tune in to these fantastical visions that in many ways make our day-to-day pale in comparison. And for a lot of people that are disenfranchised in the world, it would be very appealing and very seductive to just keep plugging into that space while neglecting the so-called three-dimensional real world. And so we need to develop skill sets, systems, and values to be able to tap in and out seamlessly back and forth from these spaces in a way that is really useful, coherent, and healthy. And so this is how it shifted things for me, is showing me more and more of what's possible, and consolidating the need for us to really have a life that can benefit from these things in a way that is measurable and tangible.
Great. Ali, I'm going to ask you next, and then finally I'm going to come to Anton.
Yeah, so Terence McKenna, as much as I admire him tremendously and as much as he influenced my life in many ways, I think Terence McKenna put out an idea of the DMT experience, which was that it doesn't involve, in fact, he explicitly said this, it's not about you and your own inner world, it's about going out somewhere else and encountering the other. And my biggest lesson from the DMTx trial was that I thoroughly disagree with that. I don't think we can separate our inner experience, the guts of being human, what Jack was just talking about, the nitty gritty mundane aspect of showing up as who you want to be, being in a relationship, messing up, trying to be a better person. All of that is linked to the metaphysical reality in an inextricable way. So that, I think, my hope is that these experiences, and as more and more people have them, start to reveal DMT as a teacher in the same way we look at ayahuasca or psilocybin, because that was my biggest lesson, basically, was the sophistication of the teaching was unparalleled from anything I've experienced. It was similar to ayahuasca, but it was incredibly direct and crisp, and there was a different quality to it. And so that for me that's beautiful. And so I really do hope, to the points Anton made earlier, that this is an experience that with adequate training, a bit like skydiving, with adequate training and good preparation and a good environment, I think most people, healthy people could experience, and I think should. It's incredibly powerful. So
Okay, and finally, Anton, what's your takeaway from all of this?
Well, Graham, your question was, has it changed my view on DMT? And I think in answering that, it has. And I want honor Rick Strassman, who's on the call, because he honored DMT itself by calling it spirit molecule. And I've been lucky enough.
None of us would be here if it wasn't for Rick's absolutely crucial pioneering work.
Yes. And I've been fortunate enough in the last 2 or 3 years to try varying types of DMT, whether that's through acacia, through laboratory grade DMT mixed with harmaline, and then of course this experiment. And what it struck me is DMT is the spirit molecule. Ayahuasca is a concoction, and bless the indigenous for what they've done in creating that concoction by bringing together the chacruna and the Banastaras Kapi and creating what they've done. But at the end of the day, the magic is the molecule. And this is what I've come to realize. And there isn't or hasn't been a difference to me that's that big between sitting in an ayahuasca circle or doing these variants, whether it's acacia or laboratory grade DMT that's imbibed in a separate way with harmaline. You connect to source. There is a notion of the sacred. And I find that just incredible. And I go back to that thing I said earlier. I really believe that this is a tool, divine gift sent here by something to allow us to communicate with it. So all it's done is enhance my view on that.
Beautifully put, Anton. So I think that brings me to the end of my questions. I'm going to go back to Andrew now. And Andrew will steer us into the next stage of this event.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Graham. Hopefully you can hear me. So is Graham, I know he has to disappear at some point, but what we plan to do is we've been kind of harvesting some questions. I've been trying to filter through chit chat and extract some questions. So I have 2 or 3 questions that I like to ask, well, that I've drawn from the audience, and then we should probably bring in Rick again. He might have some comments, but I guess the question that's come up a lot. Terence McKenna used to say, "Everybody gets elves." I've heard no word of the elves yet, but you certainly spoke about a huge multiplicity of entities. So I'll start with you. Grinning slightly there, Carl. Did you get elves?
I wouldn't say elves as such, but bollards. Bollards would be the closest I could get to sort of mini elf-like creatures, but bollards made of light language. So yeah, always the logos mixed in with these entities, I would say.
What about you, Ali? Any elves, gnomes, mischievous little creatures?
I got entities and hats, but I wouldn't say they were
okay,
elves.
close.
But what I did get to Terence McKenna's point is the kind of these hyperdimensional, extremely friendly chinchilla. They look like chinchillas. They were speaking a visible language, which is what McKenna was talking about, and that was incredible. You know, at the time I was like, this is so Terence McKenna. I'm not even sure. This is me being primed. But, I started speaking back, trying to sort of imagine their symbols as I spoke. And so there was this kind of attempted exchange, but we had no idea what the other was saying. And they were, like he described, these self-dribbling basketballs, really happy. And they had a similar energy, so their affect was similar, but they weren't elvish. Maybe that's what the elves looked like on a Friday or whatever day it was. Maybe they dressed differently at different times.
Yeah, I think what we've learned now with these so-called elves that they are of a multitude of forms, but unified by their character. Sees them in a certain way, but they always seem to have the same. They're extremely lively, giggly, mischievous, kind of bursting with energy, life, and just having a great fucking time in there. So we don't necessarily expect them to always have the same form. That will, I think, depend on your own personal neurology to some extent. But what about you, Jack? Any elves, pigs, gnomes, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I got at least one elf, as I said before, like that looked pretty much like one, considering I have a limited understanding of what elves are. But yeah, like for me, it's mostly machines and robotic constructs slash, yeah, elfish creatures in cartoons. I love cartoons like Mickey Mouse and that kind of stuff. During the DMTx, yeah, I remember at least one proper elf that was operating machinery or doing clairvoyance on some kind of equipment. But yeah,
quite typical, right?
Yeah.
What about you, Anton?
Well,
Elves working merrily away.
Yeah, I think the thing here is elves. It's a plural thing, isn't it? And the strangeness. You don't seem to meet singular entities that often, albeit I have met singular. So it's always this little tribe, this little group, and I go for more gingerbread men, rather than elves. But then you could one person's gingerbread men is another person's Snow White and Seven Dwarfs is another person's elves, isn't it? You can see how people could call in that thing, but little people running around mischievously and laughing and giggling and showing you things. Yes, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so from the joyful to the less joyful, perhaps, I didn't get too much of a sense of, perhaps a little bit from Carl, but were there any entities that were, shall we say, minimally disapproving of what you were doing, or actively, at the other extreme perhaps, actively telling you that you shouldn't be doing this, this is wrong, this is the wrong way to treat this molecule? Did anyone get the sense that we were completely on the wrong track with this idea? You can maybe carry on there, Anton.
Right. Well, I think my experience of that is it's all related to reverence. If you're coming with reverence and clean heart, if, like the astronauts that might be sent off with the right stuff, you've got to come with humility. It's like Captain Cook arriving on the beach of Tahiti. Walk up the beach, and there in the jungle are going to be these people. Come humbly towards them. You're the explorer trekking on their land. So that was very much part of my 6-week process leading up to the moment. Be humble, be reverential. And I think if you come with that, you get a response that's representative of that. If you come with some type of arrogance or disdain, I think you are going to get a bad message. And certainly where I've seen people have difficult times, it's usually because their attitudes prevailed. So no, I think if you come with the right mood, right attitude, you're okay.
Yeah,
I had
that's
nothing. I thought, should we be doing this? I mentioned it earlier, back in 2015. Should we be entertaining an exploration into this space, or is it sacred, or is it part of a mystery that should never be unraveled? Should the veil never be taken back? And if you do, what do you risk? Will you die, or will John Lilly's control machine come down and give you some ghastly illness and you'll disappear because they don't want you to know? No, I haven't had that, and I've asked many times, but I've never had a negative in that context.
That's really wonderful to know, actually. It's obviously that was the one concern, is that we're just doing this wrong, and we got completely on the wrong track in a way. Carl, what about you? Was there any negative experiences, any sense that we shouldn't be doing this?
No, I think they benefit from our energy. I think there's this symbiosis, there's a mutual exchange. So I think that they're absolutely benefiting. I think, following on from what I was saying about the technology, I think that when an fMRI was involved, I think that wasn't necessarily, it's kind of trumping them and maybe their scanning technologies, and they're very concerned as to what's going on when you're in a scanner. But what was interesting about that was that I still then had to go in, even though I'd had a warning from probably the largest amount of entities I've ever experienced. 2 weeks later, I had to go back into the scanner and have it done again. And then there were no entities, as if to say, we told you so. We're not coming with, crying wolf and all the rest of it. We're not going to come back and tell you. So the landscape was intact, same landscape, no entities.
So why do you think that was? Were they just playing with you? Were they just kind of testing, or
I think I was also
they were actively trying to discourage you from doing this, or they were just fed up of you?
I think it was because they kind of gave the cosmic joke away. They immediately showed me I was immortal, with a white flash to say, you're immortal, but don't die. You're in a human form right now. They added ticker tape to make sure I remembered, and then it was a question of what's going on. So they were sort of like trying to help me, but by doing so, I think they gave too much of the secret away.
Okay. So Ali, any negative entity experiences?
No, not well. I mean, it's an interesting question. I had one experience with an entity where I was a bit too forward, and it was like kind of like a peacock, very elaborate peacock, and I felt like I made a faux pas. Like it was one of the, I think it was in the first dosing, and I was like so excited that it was very present. I was like, oh, I started asking loads of questions. I was like, basically, where are you when I'm not here, kind of thing, and it got very just offended, and then kind of left. And so that, I was just rude, I think, in retrospect. I think I was just being rude. And so there was that. I didn't have the experience ever of a sense of, I'm not meant to be there, or this is something that, we shouldn't be doing. I got, like somebody else has said, more indifference than I got that, except for the times where there was interest. I had a really memorable encounter with, what felt like a sort of planet-sized, very feminine spider. I called it the Spider Queen afterwards, and that was really meaningful and bizarre. But it was an experience where it wanted to merge with me and sort of kind of connect with me, and I didn't want to, and so there was a sort of negotiation and a sort of will I, won't I, and it was quite linked to my own intimacy stuff. So it was a very complex thing, but it ended up leaving sort of disappointed. And so there was a sense of, I guess what I experienced was what we experience in life. Sometimes we have relationships that don't go well, and sometimes we have lots and lots gets lost in translation. So there was a lot of, almost felt like being, encountering different etiquettes of different types of entity and just not really knowing how best to behave. But never a sense of that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I think that's to expect. I mean, when I moved to Japan, I mean, I'm dealing with other humans, but still at the same time, you don't understand the culture. You don't understand, you say something that's perfectly normal in English, and they're like deeply offended. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. And so you can multiply manyfold when you're dealing with something so alien. It's not surprising, I don't think. You shouldn't expect to go in there and get their complete perfect cooperation. That seems like something that needs to be developed over time, without a doubt. Did you feel the same about that, Jack?
Sorry, I need to come in at the moment. I've got to go now.
Okay.
Andrew and all friends, it has been lovely talking with you. I think it's been a fantastically interesting session, and look forward to more.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Be well. I'll leave the audience in your good hands, Andrew.
Bye, Graham.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah, for me, it was quite neutral. The entities were not giving me any signal that I should have not been there. They were mostly doing their thing. And so it was mostly me either projecting my fears or insecurities or vulnerabilities. And I can only distinctively remember, especially in the first few sessions, my body still adjusting to the whole thing. And in one specific instance, feeling that maybe I was doing something toxic to my body, that the body wasn't designed to get that much DMT for that long. But the entities were not really giving me that knowledge. I was mostly, generating it myself, making assumptions. Otherwise, for me, entities have always been either neutral or welcoming. I don't ever remember any of these entities attacking me or judging me. No. So far we've had a very good relationship.
Thank you. So I'm getting the overall impression here that as long as we go into this space with a great deal of respect as And as Anton was saying, humility and with the right intent. It's not so much the technology, the techniques that we're using to enter the space, but more our humility, reverence. Use that word a lot, Anton. So it seems to me, and I will kind of finish up here with my kind of final question, and you might agree with me or not, but I think you probably will agree with me, is that we seem to be on the right track with this technology. Some of you were saying that it seemed clean and clear, almost crystalline, pure. Seems like we have perhaps stumbled upon finally what could be the secret to extended explorations and establishing relationships with the beings within this space. And if so, what's next? What is next, Carl? What is next? It's a very open-ended question, but where do we go from here?
5-MeO DMT extended.
Okay. Simultaneous DMTx's?
I know Jack's shaking it. I know Jack's shaking his head, but I feel as if as we learn more about 5-MeO, I think that it is, in terms of health benefits, I think that it's extremely beneficial. And I'm maybe it's just because I have such a short duration of my 5 experiences, having done it maybe 40 or 50 times. I think I tend to start swearing about the cosmic joke after about 2 minutes. So if I could be staying, kept in there without having to take an MAOI, I think, yeah, that would be my preference. But yeah, in terms of this as a technology, I think it's potentially, you could class it as a transhumanist technology, in the sense that, I know, Andrew, you've done a lot of sort of sketching out of how we would like take care of waste management and food intake, etc. It strikes me as sort of in terms of that longer journey. And as Jack says, I think that we really need to do an hour, 4 hours before we do 4 days, 4 months, just to see what happens. And yeah, I think that I'm very interested in how we improve the protocol together.
Thank you, Carl. Wonderful. Ali, where now?
Where now? Yeah. Well, I think staying in longer. Firstly, I think I certainly had the feeling that I would have been comfortable, perhaps in doubling the time. I think probably the others might. I think a few people have said, it would be doable. More time in there, I think, would be good. And then, but more than that, I think we need to develop different, what John Vervaeke would call psychotechnologies, basically ways of perceiving and framing reality and techniques that help us to navigate more intentionally. Because it's a vast experience / realm. And so I think if we can get our astronaut training in place and actually figure out, okay, how does one navigate intentionally to a particular place? Can we then experiment with, could 2 people go there and come back with verifiable information? That would be really interesting. So I think we need to improve. There's the technology itself in terms of the pump and the dosage, which I think the team at Imperial have done a phenomenal job of figuring out. But then there's the internal technology of actually figuring out, well, how do you navigate this? How do you skydive in that realm, let's say, right? What are the skills you need? What are the ways to do it? And that's really exciting. So I hope we keep going with that, and I certainly intend to try and figure out good techniques.
I would agree with you entirely. And you read occasionally kind of some connective, what did they learn? Where's all the objective information that we can verify and stuff? So look, this is the first time that anyone has ever done this. Give them a break, give them a chance. This is not something where you're going to pump someone with DMTx first time and they're going to come back with the secrets of the universe. This is the start of a very long journey. And as you say, it's not just about the DMTx infusion technology, but about, as you described, the psychotechnology. That's something that's probably a much longer, I'm sure it's actually a much longer and steeper learning curve than simply learning how to maintain a stable DMT concentration in the brain. So there's a lot more to learn, I think. So Jack, do you think it would be useful in the future? This is your final question to you, Jack. from me anyway, to have multiple people undergoing DMTx at the same time and try to establish some kind of shared experience? Do you get the sense that that might be interesting, at least?
Yeah, totally. I mean, as people become more and more competent at extended DMT, they may be able to enable communication between people real time. And I think the imperative for the future is to establish metrics and understand how the experience changes them. So in a way, quantifying as many parameters of life as possible and see how DMT plays into them, so that these conversations become increasingly less whimsical and more directed towards problem solving, whether on the materialist side or the existential side. And I think that is, for me personally, an imperative, is to try to ground it as much as possible on the human experience and the problems we are facing as individuals and as societies. And also user-friendliness. DMTx is really not user-friendly. We can definitely improve on that with delivery systems similar to those used for insulin, for instance, with pumps that would be wearable as opposed to having to be bed-bound, so that one can deploy skills like the one I learned and operate in the 3D world while breaking through. And so I would say user-friendliness and quantified self approaches to DMTx, as well as interpersonal communication during the experience, could be the 3 avenues to really push for the future.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah, it certainly seems like you can think of 100 different ways we can approach this, whether it is establishing the ontology of the beings, or learning to navigate the space, or learning about the relationship between the DMT space and us as humans. And there's so much, clearly, we can't get into it all. But Anton, I'll finish with you. Where do we go from here, Anton? Where the hell do we go from here?
Well, Andrew, you're such an inspiration for everything of this. I mean, I know where I want to go. I want to get 6 people all going out at the same time for maybe 2, 3, 4 hours, and to test for correlations in visual landscape. And we could have police artists, as soon as somebody comes back, somebody could draw it for you, like they do for people, and say, does it look like this? Seek correlations in what people are seeing. Seek correlations in the communication with entities. Try and, get a group consensus as to what's actually happening. And then, of course, in my dream, each one of those people would be fed a question that they don't know on a double-blind basis. They would make that question to the entity in separate rooms. And if each one of them came back with the same answer from the entity, well, then we've changed the world, So what I want progress into this technology with sacred reverence to see if we can commune with the sentient other to seek guidance on how to save our world. That's it.
Wonderful. That's a beautiful way to end. Thank you very much, Anton. So I think, well, first of all, I'd really like to thank the panel here. I mean, this has been an incredible and insightful and fascinating discussion, and we could go on for hours, but we just don't have the time. But I think it would be most appropriate if we finished with the man who really started it all, who might have some words, Dr. Rick Strassman. You're muted.
Well, yeah, I mean, this has been an amazing development. So yeah, I'm glad for whatever contribution our research at the University of New Mexico sparked. Obviously, it sparked a forest fire or a furnace, or something very big and very very full of light, obviously. Well, I've been taking notes, and I've got some points, maybe no answers, but some points that I think might be worth bringing up. One is from the technical point of view, the infusion itself. There's a Swiss study manuscript that's in consideration for for publication now, where instead of a bolus beginning the infusion, it was just a gradually ramped up infusion, and it was for a longer period. I think for an hour. That may be a way of getting around the initial disorientation and anxiety of the first few minutes. So that would be worth considering in the future. The other is the question of tolerance. Are the effects less intense as time goes on? And so far it just seems a little unclear. So Anton described that it went from 8 to 9 at a certain point, and somebody else, I can't remember who, described it as not quite as intense toward the end as in the beginning. So I think that is an important question, because if there is a small amount of tolerance developing after a half hour, then there would be more tolerance after an hour or 2 or 3 or 4, let's say. So that needs to be investigated more carefully. One thing which I'm surprised that nobody raised was the whole issue of endogenous DMT, and the reality sense that you get from an infusion of DMT, and how does that relate to the function of endogenous DMT? There were some studies from Ann Arbor published, I guess, 4 years ago now, demonstrating that concentrations of DMT in the mammalian brain are as high as concentrations for neurotransmitters, canonical neurotransmitters like serotonin and like dopamine. So that establishes, or it supports the notion that there is a neurotransmitter system in the mammalian brain that uses DMT. And a PhD student from Ann Arbor a few days ago defended his thesis, Nicholas Glynos. And one of the findings of his study was that concentrations of DMT are quite high in frontal cortex and in parietal cortex as well. So there could be this widespread neurotransmitter system in the brain which uses DMT, which makes you wonder, what is the role of endogenous DMT? Is it some kind of reality thermostat? Like if concentrations go up spontaneously or because of certain stimuli, are the experiences which are had at that time more important, more real, more convincing? So that's an important question, I think, to keep in mind is, what's the relationship of the state brought about by high concentrations relative to steady state concentrations, or the small variations which may occur from hour to hour in our daily lives. So it is tempting to speculate that DMT stimulates some circuitry in the brain which gives us our sense of reality. Like this is true, this is concrete, this is convincing, and it may occur on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis as well, which starts to kind of question the whole issue of the endomatrix. Is the function of endogenous DMT to keep us within a narrow range of consensus reality, and when concentrations go up, obviously things shift. So a number of people discuss psi phenomena, synchronicities, precognition, telepathy, those kinds of things. Too bad that David Luke isn't in on the conversation, because it would be quite interesting to hear his take on this. My approach is kind of neo-Aristotelian medieval, metaphysics. And that involves what's called, the active intellect, or the, which is this like overarching repository of information, which contains everything from the past, everything from the present, and all possible future outcomes. And one of the contributions of Aristotle, was that if you stimulate the imagination or the imaginative faculty, you can conflate yourself, or you can conflate or approach the contents of the what do you call the active intellect. So if DMT stimulates what might be called the imagination, then the imagination thus hypertrophied can make contact with the contents of the active intellect. And I think one could contemporize the active intellect, start thinking about it using more modern terminology, and approach it technologically with modern tools. One of my favorite science fiction writers is a Brit. His name is Olaf Stapledon, and one of his books that he wrote in the 1940s is called First and Last Men, and it is a chronicle of 2 billion years of human evolution, and 19 species of human, and the first species is us. And it goes on, and it continues on for the space of 2 billion years. So the last species of man is on Uranus, because the inner planets become inhospitable, and the average lifespan is 35,000 years, because that's the amount of time required to obtain all possible information. One of the things that they do is, like every few millennia, is the entire species is in telepathic contact with each other, and it's the peak species experience, and it occurs every 5,000 years or something. So I think the possibility of DMT being involved in a mass species-wide telepathy experience is fascinating to consider. One of the things also, when we were speaking about the future, is the whole issue of genetic engineering. Can we engineer humans to secrete more DMT, to increase the synthesis enzymatically? And I think that could be a future direction as well, is to increase our ability to produce more DMT, and that could be like one species or two species in the future, like kind of a la Stapleton's perspective on things. Whether this is a good thing or not, I mean, in a way, it doesn't really matter, because we're going to be going there anyway. And I think the main thing is to keep our heads, and to be kind and reverent and compassionate in the process. But I think it's naive, to believe, that this, powerful, kind of technology isn't, going to be abused, or an attempt, to abuse it. Like Alex Jones a number of years ago, reached out to me, and he said, "You want to talk about DMT on my show?" And I said, "No, thank you." And then a few months later, I came across his, his monologue on DMT, and he was, going on about, the elites are smoking DMT, and the entities are telling them what to do to promote their world domination. That's Alex Jones, but still, I think it's important, to keep in mind that there are going to be ethical, moral, and political issues, raised about, who's using DMT and why, for what purposes. I think, the experiences which people have been discussing, disabuse, the notion of the importance and the be all and the end all of the mystical unitive white light state. The DMT state is packed full of information and it's discrete. It isn't like you make it up afterwards, after you come down. It's, there, it's contained in the state itself. So I think, the interactive relational state, which, DMT is the paragon of, has a lot going for it relative, to the unitive, mystical state of just, oneness, undifferentiated, power or of light. There's, there's a lot more to work with, I think, in the DMT state. And I think also, finally, these discussions or, these descriptions of the experience, bring home the importance of the idea, that the drug works on you. It works on your mental apparatus, your biology, your experiences, your set and your setting. So I don't think these experiences, would have happened in any other, people other than the ones having them. So, the drug works on you, which means you need to, be working on yourself at the same time in order, to make the most of these kinds of experiences, to develop a language and an ability to communicate what's conveyed to you in the state. So yeah, there's no escaping the hard work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rick. I think it's beautifully apposite that we end with the man who really started this, 30 years ago now, and it's amazing the progress, the road that we've traveled in that time, and I get the feeling that we've really just begun to travel on that road, and it's a great privilege and a great honor to be in a small way part of that remarkable journey that we're all on. So it is getting on now. It's 1:45 in the morning here, so I think it's a perfect time to close the show. Again, I'd like to thank, of course, Rick and all of the four panelists, Carl, Ali, Anton, and Jack, for sharing their fascinating experiences. And we'll probably be doing this again in a few years when it's round 2 DMTx or something like that. And of course, Noonautics, Egon and Patrick, who really spit this, and it was their original idea to have this moderated discussion. And I think it's an inspired idea. So perhaps Egon, you just like to kind of close the show, so to speak, have another couple of words, and then we'll finish.
Sure. Well, thank you all very much. This was very inspiring, and I appreciate you all taking the time out of your day, and Andrew, your evening, your night. And yeah, thank you all very much.
Okay, so I think that's that. So thank you everyone on YouTube and on Twitter who's streaming. There's hundreds of you now streaming this, so, and it will be available, of course, so please tell your friends if they missed it or they couldn't log on for whatever reason, that this will be available in perpetuity on YouTube. So thank you everyone. It's been a great evening. So it's good night from me, and it's good night from me. Good night.